5, 4, 3.
Hello, and welcome to Digital North. I'm Ryan Hamilton, and joined with me today are Jonathan Tompkins.
Io.
Hi-oh. Thomas Harms.
Hello there.
And David Nielsen.
Did you forget my name?
Baby. I mean, I just saw you on Saturday, but I've already forgotten you.
Wait, which Saturday? I have so many Saturdays.
That's right. You guys were. Oh,
Well,
that's not.
you know,
That's,
tonight it doesn't
We
matter
spent
who
the
we
night
are.
together.
Tonight doesn't matter who we are because we're all playing the role of armchair investigator with Casting JonBenet. This documentary came out in 2017 and it was directed by Kitty Green. Thomas, you chose the documentary, so why don't you take it away? What is this documentary about, and what made you choose it for us?
Well, to start, what made me choose it, I had very spotty internet connection trying to look up a film for us to view this week. And I remember someone had mentioned this one to me about a month ago, saying it was a pretty good documentary that I should watch. So it's kind of a last minute thing. But the
Hmm.
documentary, Casting John Benet on Netflix, is about the murder of I believe it was a 6-year-old girl named John Benet in Boulder, Colorado. And it was kind of the neat storytelling style of having actors try out for the part of playing a dramatization of her death, I suppose,
Right,
and the
and
situation surrounding it.
all of the
So
actors are living in the Boulder area, right? They're all
that
locals.
is true. Yes.
hmm.
Yeah, I thought that was really interesting how they had these local actors reflect on what happened, like about what, like probably 9 or 10 years ago when this filming was actually taking place.
Hmm.
It was really interesting to kind of like get the audiences. I don't know. For me, it really helped the way that this was presented to us as an audience. Really made me empathize with the parents easier. I found that it was easy for me to try to see them through the eyes of the people who were on the casting couch, and because of that, it made me quickly kind of like understand the world that this family was living in.
Hmm.
Totally. And another thing about that is that since they're from the Boulder area and about, I mean, they were definitely old enough to know what was going on at the time, or at least hear what was going on. So they all have their own opinions on what happened, and they paint their each individual character in a different light based on what they'd seen and read at that time.
Hmm.
What do you think about the style of presentation? Because watching this documentary, reflexively, I just associate it with Amanda Knox. Um, what what was the name of the documentary that we saw just a couple of weeks ago? Something
I think it
something
was
Amanda
just
Knox.
Amanda Knox, maybe.
Yeah, it was called. I think it was called Amanda Knox. I
Well,
can let me
um,
look that one up.
I
Pretty sure it
couldn't
was just Amanda
I
Knox.
couldn't help but associate it because it was a similar type of case where it was a murder under pretty out of the ordinary circumstances. I mean, it was Christmas. It was a murder in the house. The body was found there. There was a ransom note. Um, but there was, I assume, a bit of a media frenzy about it. In fact, I asked my parents if they wanted to watch it, and my mom's first reaction was like, "Oh no, I don't. I've I've already been exposed to that enough. I don't need to watch this documentary again
Mm-hmm.
or just
That's
relive
what my
this
mom was
again."
like.
Yeah,
Yep,
really?
that's what my mom said. She was like, "Oh yeah, I remember that. It was all over the news
Mm.
for weeks and years even. Like they kept coming out with new stuff."
Yeah, yeah. If you read the Wikipedia page, you see that there are legal issues that extend until like 2008 about the parents being, about charges being brought up again and or dropped and or like moved to different like deliberating bodies to speculate on whether or not it was legal or what was happening.
Hmm.
And David, you said that you had actually read about this case like several weeks ago before we actually had this assigned to us. So what about the
Mhm.
rest of you? Did you know about this murder case before watching this documentary? Because I didn't.
Mm,
I did
I
not either.
did. I did. Um I knew about it because there was a production on television that was going through the evidence that had already been presented. I guess there may have been new evidence that prompted it. It looked like it was probably made in like 2008, 2011, between like that time period, quite a ways after the actual is incident. But I saw a lot of that on TV with my mom, and my mom was like, "Yeah, this was like when you were a kid, this was all over the news." So I had watched some of that, seen
Right, because it was
some
it
of the
was
details.
1996, so you would have been 3, right? And
Yeah,
I
I
would have
was
been
three or
3.
four. Yeah,
Hmm.
yep. So we
Um,
weren't old enough to remember it happening, um, but it did happen when we were around.
that's right. Um, David, what do you think? Like, what tools did the documentary use that you thought were useful in conveying the subject or the purpose of the film?
Oh, you thought this out.
Oh.
I'm just a very quick thinker.
Yeah.
Well,
I thought the how they used the auditions. They were audition tapes, but it seemed like 60-70% of them were actually accounts of how people had personally had experiences similar to that in the case, or how they'd heard about it, or how they even viewed the people involved in the case. And that was a really personal level view. It wasn't objective at all. It was just, this is how people see it. And as a consequence, this is how they act. So, for example, Patsy, people trying out for Patsy, some of them said, oh, she totally did it. And you could see how that would affect how they would portray her during an audition. And that just bringing that human element into it, and how people are really ready to just accept whatever probably they first heard. Like in the case of the Amanda Knox
hmm.
documentary, a lot of people still think, despite mounds of evidence, that she was responsible for it because of what came out in the media in the immediate aftermath.
Hmm.
And I think that is a large part of what the people in the documentary thought too.
Oh, did you think that um, that there was a specific narrative or slant that the documentary maker was going for when making this doc?
Not necessarily. I think that the objective was just to get regular people who might not have, um, who probably did the research in the sense that they watched interviews and things pertaining to the character they were to portray. But I don't think that there was an explicit, um, many things taken to make sure that it was actually objectively presenting facts, because at no point was there any voiceovers or anything that outlined the details of the crime or the timeline or anything like that.
Right, and I think that's a really interesting point about this documentary too, is that there wasn't necessarily a well, first of all, we didn't get any primary source documents, so we never saw any of the trials that were mentioned or interviews on talk shows because they were on Larry King Live, I think. Um, or no, maybe not Larry King, but
Yes,
they were on
they
some.
were on they were on Larry King. At least the mother was. They mentioned that.
All right. And the fact that like these things are mentioned but we never see them, and also never really speak to any of the primary investigators into the case, it was really interesting that what we learn about this case and about the content of like these people's character is all completely just secondhand and just hearsay from these people trying to recall what this was like, 9 years ago. And it seems really strange to me that there really isn't any attempt to kind of try to establish um, a verifiable um, kernel of truth that this type of investigation tells. It just really seemed like the filmmakers attempt to just say, I don't know what happened, but here's a really interesting way to say that I still don't know what happened, and here's what the other people think about it. Like, it really didn't have any sort of um, purposefulness, I guess, from my point of view. It seemed like it was mostly just kind of people saying, well, I think that she's a little bit neurotic, and she was bossing. Oh, people in these pageants are always crazy, and like it didn't really seem like the point of the documentary was to kind of further our understanding of the case at all, because as I said, I wasn't familiar with this case at all. And so going into it and hearing what these people had to say, it actually took me a while to fill in the blanks, and I had to read the Wikipedia page to know about like the current legal status and what's going on with the case and what's going on with the parents and things like that. So it really just seemed to not just pay any mind to furthering the plot of this story.
So about those details, what did you learn in the Wikipedia article? Because I haven't read it in a bit.
Well, for instance, I learned that as they touch upon briefly in the documentary, that there were a few hearings where like the blood and hair samples and writing samples from the parents were taken, and that I actually read the ransom note, which was really weird.
Oh, did you read it?
I did.
Oh man, it
Like the
said
actual handwritten one?
Yeah, I was reading some summaries because, like you, Ryan, I had to read a little bit too because I wanted a little bit more info.
Mm-hmm.
That the a professional who I'll say for the viewers,
Well,
a professional.
writing expert?
Yeah, basically writing. It didn't say where. Oh, forensic linguist. His name is James Fitzgerald. That was the
So that's
gentleman who did
different
it.
than handwriting expert, by the way.
Yeah, forensic linguist. There you go. Concluded that it was most certainly not written by a criminal,
Yeah.
and that it was
Well.
written by using, get this, lines from Speed and Dirty Harry and other films.
So not written by a character or a criminal who appears as a character in a 1980s film.
Yeah, it also said that it was similar to Patsy's handwriting, but was not conclusively Patsy's handwriting. And that was one guy's take on it, one forensic linguist's take on it.
And there, David, to answer your question, there was also, I believe in 2008, a couple of like some law circuit or some public defenders or like attorney general decided that they were going to reopen the case, and I believe that the case was handed over like a couple of times, and still there wasn't any conviction that was made on anybody, I think. Although there was like a libel charge against the mom and dad because they wrote a book all about what was the book called? It was like Murdered Innocence or something like that.
Oh, I don't know.
I think that was what it was called.
Yeah.
They showed a picture in the documentary.
Yeah, they were.
Lawyer. Yeah, go ahead, man. Go for it.
I was just gonna say that they were sued for libel for two of the names that they used.
And then counter
Yeah.
that would be at the Ramsey family lawyer, L. Lynn Wood, threatened to sue CBS for libel based on its conclusion in their documentary series that JonBenet was killed by Burke. So it's fun.
Yeah,
for
I think that's a
everybody.
pretty strong case for libel.
Yeah.
Much stronger than, I don't know, naming people involved. in the investigation.
So,
Hmm.
David, to go back to the question and my answer to it, I don't really think that I have clearly identified what the subject or purpose of the documentary was. So I don't really know if it was a good documentary on that front. Like I don't know that I think the documentary was effective at um, like
In
having a
my
purpose.
opinion,
Hmm.
it's kind of like the Amanda Knox, where I think the purpose of that was to show how biased people are, especially people who are close to the investigation.
Yeah.
But in this case, it was people who were removed from the investigation, some of whom did have ties to it. One person said, I think he worked for the same company that John Ramsey worked for. And I
Mm.
think another one, her brother had been murdered, and her parents were for a time in contact with the parents of John Bennett. John Benet. If I say John Bennett, it's only because everybody has always called her that around here.
Are you
Even though,
serious?
yeah,
Whoa.
like my parents and stuff.
John Bennett.
David grew
John
up in
Bennett.
a conservative
Well,
family.
because I
That's
always
why.
thought that it was
Oh.
like probably Jean or something like that, Joan, and then it was Bennett Ramsey, like hyphenated last name. So that's what I thought it was until I
Oh.
actually looked it up.
Yeah, no, she just got a fancy French name.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Um, but I
I,
think that ultimately the purpose or whatever is just to kind of show how people take in information and evaluate the situation based on things they heard 20 years ago, and now they're ready to say that on camera and commit to it so much so that they'll risk a potentially lucrative job to use that information to support their auditions.
I, yeah, it sounds like this was really also coming around in a time where crime docs are very prevalent
They're
right
hot right
now.
now.
They're
And
very hot right
and they're
now.
really hot on Netflix right now, which
Yeah,
as Thomas mentioned, this is a Netflix special.
it is.
So it
It
might
is.
seem in some ways a little bit similar to that cash grab nature doc that we
I
saw
was just
on
about to use the word
Orchids.
cash grab. Yeah. That was PBS though. They can cash grab whenever they want.
Oh yeah.
They can do no
Oh,
wrong.
did you know that they're supported by viewers like you?
Shut up.
Fuck
Shut
him
up,
up,
man.
John.
God, Jesus.
Um, yeah, so I thought it was a really interesting way to get into this subject, and it was a really interesting way to kind of tell a story with just kind of candid interviews, but I do find something a little bit wrong with like our just me as a viewer's knowledge of this case completely being based off of just what these people are kind of
Hmm?
pulling out of their ass on a
You
casting
really,
couch.
you
Yeah,
really
so
want to be
after,
familiar before you see this,
yes,
and
I
trying to
agree with
get
that.
more out of it.
Hmm.
Ryan, what things kind of stick out to you most as maybe not being explained or explored in the documentary to the degree that they should have been, considering what's in the reading you found?
Um, like a ending, like a conclusion to this. There was no conclusion to what happened legally in the
There was
documentary,
quite an
right?
artful conclusion, but it was the furthest thing from a conclusion that I've ever seen.
Yeah, it was
Yeah,
not an
it was not
objective conclusion
empirical.
of like
Nothing
what
empirical.
they hope happened
No,
or
in
what
fact,
may
they
have happened.
displayed multiple multiple Patsies and multiple Johns.
Yeah, well, if you'd like to talk about that, I'd love to because I thought that was a really artfully like I thought that was a very well done scene, and I thought it was very artful and pretty unique to the genre.
I agree with that.
So
But
yeah,
before we get to that, so what facts did they miss that they should have mentioned if it were that type of documentary?
mm, I guess I would have. I, I like when documentaries do just some follow-up text at the end saying like 5 years later, John Ramsey is still CEO, and instead of his small company having one plane, it has two. Um, Burke, although a creepy kid, had no problems starting up his first startup, and fucking John
Are you
Carr
making this
is
up right
still
now, or
creepy.
is this
Yeah, no, these are not facts, but like I really like how
just to be clear?
yeah. Just to be clear, I enjoy when documentaries have a little bit of an epilogue, just says, since the making of this and beyond this story that I'm telling you, this is some more context to the
Put a bow on
situation.
that shit.
Yeah,
Yeah,
and like this didn't have that.
you liked the Breakfast Club approach where they
Mm.
do a short shot and then a
Mm-hmm.
freeze frame and put
Freeze
some
frame
text.
at the end.
You know
They're
what
all
I think
high-fiving.
what I think part of it is a little bit strange to me is that although JonBenet and her family are the like they're the focus, they're the object of this documentary, they're never subjects, and like we never see them as subjects, and I always it feels a little bit weird.
I don't even
To
know what they look like.
just yeah, exactly. It feels a little bit weird to just have their story told without them.
Mhm.
Yeah, by people who are asserting tons of stuff about them.
Yeah, by people who are just speculating on what happened. I mean, like there
Well,
was one point where they speculated that like maybe it was like a Santa Claus, or maybe because John Ramsey was like a CEO, that maybe he was part of some like child sex ring in the area, and they were like trading sexual favors of their young daughters. Like the fact that I was just thrown out in this
Mhm.
documentary, just kind of, without any context and without any sort of like weight behind it, like the weight of evidence. I mean,
Mhm.
it just it seems like a disservice a little bit. Like it seems like they're
Mhm.
almost spreading misinformation through this documentary by not providing any evid like contextual evidence that helps us make some sense of what might have happened beyond what
One
they're
could
saying.
conclude from this that they may not have had rights or were not really able to put
mhm.
up the regular sets of pictures and descriptions that you normally see if you are talking about a murder case, right?
Hey, fair enough. Yeah,
Yeah.
I hadn't
All the
considered like
pictures,
the
you
Well,
see
real world
all
presumably
that.
implications.
Yeah.
it would have been from local news or CBS, NBC, ABC,
Hmm.
and they just couldn't purchase those rights. Maybe originally they'd pitched it as not really a documentary, but basically what we saw an artful
Remembering.
look at people's memories of the case.
Mm-hmm.
Good
Mm-hmm.
point.
So, Thomas, what have you learned about Boulder, Colorado since watching this documentary?
I've heard it's a bunch of weirdos, honestly, but I have not heard much. I haven't been there myself. It's one of those cities that I've been meaning to visit, but it's one of those places that's really expensive to live in. It's right in the
Lots of
mountains, so it's a
lots
beautiful
of
area, but it's a bunch of hippie weirdos.
Yeah, I thought it
Yeah.
was like the Portland of Colorado.
Exactly. Yep,
yeah.
that is what it is.
And Colorado is the Portland of the United States.
That is
You
true.
know?
Might be Washington State, actually. I don't know.
Hello,
I've
hello.
never just been there, and also been to Colorado.
By the
I've
way,
been
Where
to
are you
Boulder.
right
My
now?
my uncle lived in Boulder, and I visited him there on several occasions. Hip town, lots of lots of healthy people, eating healthy food, smoking lots of dope. You know, pretty good,
rope a
pretty
dope
good.
dope.
Yeah. I didn't know that it was pricey because I was like 13, 14, staying with my uncle, so I didn't really
So,
notice that. But I believe you.
But
and
Thomas,
you
if
say you're in
you,
Fort Collins.
sorry, Dave, what were
So
you saying?
you said you were in Fort Collins, right,
That is
Thomas?
correct. Yep.
So you could theoretically tomorrow drive to the location and gather some evidence for us.
I could. I
That's
could.
another
Yeah.
pretty good point to touch on because as another parallel that we can make to Amanda Knox, this was a murder scene with just terrible contamination. Like
Yeah.
there was probably no hope for the forensics team. I mean, they
Hmm.
mentioned in the documentary that they just kind of let anybody in, and
Yep.
so according to the ransom note tells the parents to like go to the bank between uh, 8 and 10 o'clock in the morning, and that they have to take out $118,000, which
Should
also
we read
just
the ransom note in
coincidentally,
full?
what was that?
I think we might want to read the ransom note in full,
Yeah,
just because there's.
I think that we could probably benefit from that. I have to pull it up.
Yeah, while you're while you're pulling that up, I'm gonna pull something else up. You know what I'm saying?
Mm.
You know what
All
I'm
right, mute your mic.
saying? Um, on the point of weird evidence and maybe faulty evidence, let's go over really quickly just the points of evidence before we read the note that were a little bit funky, or just like what they actually were
Yeah.
in there. Who feels like they have an excellent grasp on that?
I have a pretty good grasp on it, I think.
Right. Before you read, you want to hit that up for the viewers?
Yeah, well, so what we were presented in the film was just that JonBenet Ramsey went missing apparently during Christmas, and in the morning, supposedly, the family found the ransom note. It was then after, like it was that morning that the mom panicked and she called the cops, and
Mm-hmm.
so then the cops came to the house and they went on a tour of the house with John Ramsey. And it was then that they, I believe, went to the basement where they found JonBenet under a white blanket with
Before,
with uh,
so
with like damage to her skull and very obvious like choking.
Mm-hmm.
and ligature marks and things like that from being tied up. But before they did that tour of the house, apparently when they were dealing with it as a kidnapping, they only roped off Jean Benet's room, and then I believe the police left the house for a period of time without having searched the whole house.
Right, and
Damn.
that is a really interesting point at it. To add to it, and I need to pull it up, but somewhere on the Wikipedia page they list just how many different groups of people came in and left the house
Mm-hmm.
since Patsy called the cops early in the morning.
Pansy.
Patsy, Pansy.
That's okay.
Um,
We can call her Pansy.
oh yeah.
She's antsy in the Pansy. That's why you call her Pansy. Right, Clark? Clark says yes.
So two police officers responded to the 911 call and arrived at the Ramsey home within 3 minutes, and there's a citation there, so that's nice.
Whoa.
They conducted a search, a cursory search of the house, but did not find any sign of a break-in or forced entry. John made arrangements to pay the ransom. The forensics team was then dispatched to the house. Believing that the case was a kidnapping, only JonBenet's bedroom was cordoned off to prevent contamination. And so after that, friends and the family's minister arrived at the home to support the Ramsey family. Victim advocates also arrived at the scene. Friends and advocates picked up and cleaned surfaces in the kitchen, possibly destroying evidence. Boulder Police
Wow.
Detective arrived around 8 a.m. And so that means that over the 3 hours between, or I guess 2 hours between 6 and 2, there were just a whole host of people in the house. And so
Mm-hmm.
any kind of forensics evidence that they would be hoping to find would be very difficult to find.
Yeah, not
So
as botched as Amanda Knox because they knew that something was up and it was screwed up here. But these people thought that she just wasn't in the house. So you
Hmm.
could see why they wouldn't be like,
yeah,
everybody out, no one goes in, right? They believe them.
Oh, you know what? So if I just read the next paragraph titled Discovery
Mm-hmm.
of the Body, it turns out that at 1 p.m., the police officer and John Ramsey searched the basement just to see if anything was wrong. And it was then that they found JonBenet's body. So it wasn't until
so
1
why
p.m.
would they not have searched the basement. Presumably, the
That's
basement
what I'm
has
saying.
some kind of window or something.
Yeah,
Or at least in some part of it.
this is why I think everyone concluded that Patsy, or a lot of people had concluded that Patsy had done it or someone in the family had done it, because if your kid's missing, right? Do you not look in the whole house?
Also, do you not? Would you invite family and friends over to clean your house?
Is that what they invited them for?
Well, it was
I mean,
the
that's what they
victim
ended up
advocates group. Well, I guess friends and the advocates. So yeah,
Hey man, if you
guess
saw
you're
some
right.
schmutz on the counter and in this family whose kid was just kidnapped, when you want to help them out and just wipe up the
Yeah,
schmutz
Yeah,
for
bro.
'em?
There's a
Wouldn't you
bunch
call
of
They
your
just
stuff.
had a
buddies and
party,
just help
man. It
them
was
just clean
trash.
up?
They had a party.
It looked like a kid spilled, I don't know, grape juice that was particularly red all over the floor. There were a
Yes.
bunch of handprints and stuff. And
Handprints in. There's a big red wine handprint
and
on
like
the
Mm.
window downstairs.
And it should be
Yeah.
cleaned. It's just
And it
being
should.
nice.
Let me get
Obviously,
that.
it should be nice.
if you have
Lysol
any
that
rugs that
shit
are rolled up and particularly heavy, we can take those out to a dumpster and burn.
and burn them.
So,
Yeah.
Thomas, based on the evidence that you were presented with and the stories, what do you think happened?
Oh man, that's a tough one. So, like you, I agreed there wasn't any closure. So I went and looked at a few articles online, read a few more bias theories, and saw a few that said Burke. But I think it had to be the mother from what I had seen.
Mm. The
Why do
mother
you
being
think?
Patsy for the listeners.
Yeah,
Yes, Patsy.
being a patsy.
Oh, so she's being the patsy. I see how
She
it
was
is.
just a
Uh,
patsy.
It's a
mm.
woman.
So
Yep.
so
Yep.
so it
She's
wasn't
both.
her.
So, Thomas, why? Why did she murder her daughter?
Well, I guess it was mostly from other people's portraits that they had painted of her, because I really had no familiarity with this case. I didn't know any of the people, and going through it, how they had described the actual people involved, like John and John Markar and Patsy, I wanted to see what they looked like, so I just looked up a few pictures as I was watching the movie,
Hmm.
and if it wasn't John Markar, if he was just trying to get attention when he had admitted that it was him or whatever, kind of did his false confession. I think it had to have just been Patsy in a mood, I guess, in a fit, because they had always mentioned that JonBenet was wetting her bed, and that was a point of contention in the family. So it must have been, I think, if it was Patsy, just her in an angry fit.
Hmm. Just kind of the characteristics that would drive her to be a successful pageant mom would also probably drive her to be just incredibly
Overzealous in that,
yeah
yes.
yeah
Yep.
overzealous. I
With
mean, they
some
had the angle of her aging. They also had the angle of, I mean, I'm sure she was a bit of a control freak. That was what one of the Santa Clauses
Yeah.
said,
And
that she was just
these
being
are
a
all
bitch.
personality traits. These are all personality
Yeah.
traits and external things. She could very well have gone her entire life up until this point with mental illness,
Exactly.
serious psychological issues,
Well, almost
without
certainly.
anyone really trading it.
And
Almost
how many
certainly,
people
right?
do you know like that who haven't killed somebody?
Right,
Well,
exactly.
and
you know?
and there is a pretty strong correlation, I know, between things like anxiety and kind of a sense of like perfectionism and higher cortisol levels and higher levels of stress in general. And so I imagine someone who was in beauty pageants herself and now has a daughter who is a pretty successful beauty pageant queen.
It's
I
like
could I could see her just being like a big ball of just like neurotic stress, just
Yeah. It's
just
like, kind of like if
always.
she had the psychological conditions, the problems, the sickness, maybe the illness, and those things on top of it, it's like a time bomb, like a ticking time bomb for her to just have some kind of insane break,
Yeah.
you know. And it
Yeah.
only takes like, 3 minutes to strangle the crap out of a little
Well,
girl. It doesn't. She doesn't have
also,
to preconceive it or spend a long time doing it. It's like it could be one moment
So
of
what about the knots? What do you guys make of these complex
that's
knots?
what I don't get.
If it was just
well,
a crime of passion,
the
what's up with
autopsy
that?
in general, I think, kind of throws the the idea that Patsy did it herself. I don't think that's really all that plausible because I'm looking at the autopsy, some details of it right now, and she had a skull fracture, which I think would be the first thing that would happen, because if you're already strangling her, why would you also want to beat her over the head afterwards?
Well,
So I could
the
see if
head
there
just
was a
has to
crime.
hit something. Could have been the
Yeah,
floor.
that's
Could
true.
have been, you know,
But there's also a garrote, I believe it's
garrote.
garrote,
And what is
made
that,
from. It's
That's
a cord that you use to strangle somebody.
Jonathan?
So
It's like those old gangster movies where, you know, they get out the piano wire and they go
or
punch somebody. That's a
Ah.
garrote.
what was that documentary that we
Okay,
watched
okay.
about?
I just
Was
knew
it
that you were
Thailand?
also into kind of
Bondage.
yeah, some bondage stuff.
Volunteers bondage. For the viewers out there, I'm not interested in bondage that you know of. We'll leave it there.
Dave, continue,
Well, I'll
please.
cross you off the list. But it's kind of like that documentary that we were watching. I forget what, the Killing Fields, maybe.
Oh, the
one in,
ones in
or
Malaysia?
whatever. Yeah.
Oh yeah,
Mm,
Book of
I think
Silence or Act of Killing. One of the
Act of
two.
Killing.
before my time on
Um,
North.
where he
That's right.
described how they would do it most efficiently. They'd tie a cord around their neck and just pull.
Oh my
until
God, yeah, the way that he described the way that they would just systematically kill people and the ways to
Yeah,
make it the
it's
most
that sort of
efficient.
tool.
Oh
But it
my
was
God.
fashioned with some nylon cord and the handle of a paintbrush, which was matched to Patsy's, some stuff that she had laying around the house. So to me, that kind of, it's got to be more than just a crime of passion. At
So
least,
she was garroted according to the autopsy.
yes, according to the Wikipedia account of the autopsy.
So
Okay.
the
No,
massive
where
head
that's
trauma,
from.
do we know, is there a way to determine whether or not like that head trauma happened post-mortem or before she died?
I believe there
Ah,
should be a way, but I'm
Right.
not sure that the investigators
mhm.
Concluded
were.
one way or another.
And real quick, what's the reference for the autopsy? If there are one or a couple of
There
them
are
on Wikipedia.
multiple. The one with the garrote
Larry
or
King
whatever,
Life.
Oh, Larry.
from Court TV.
So Patsy, did you do it?
I didn't, but let me tell you about the grot that was used.
Rip Larry King.
Oh.
There are multiple sources for different things.
So, Dave, are you leaning more heavily towards the child sex ring and Santa Claus?
No, I'm leaning toward um, family member was involved
You
in
think
the initial
someone
killing.
you think someone slapped her over the head with a flashlight?
Damn.
Could have been maybe John was looking for a ladder and she was down there trying to wash her soiled sheets or something.
On Christmas Day.
Were her
On-
soiled sheets down there?
So
no, that's what's up.
I think
Oh,
a
okay.
point I
was
think a
just
point that
wondering.
is salient to like answering the question of what happened is the context of what was happening that night, because I think they should have touched upon it a little bit more. The Ramseys were having a really big Christmas party, right? So there were, I mean, according to a couple of people, they said that
In the
it was a
house, they were
really
having a big
lively, it was a really, really lively like party. So I mean, we can assume that there were dozens and dozens of people there, right? Which is something I wish the documentary had touched upon more or provided some objective, like check on that, so that we could actually know some of the context around what was going on at that location during that time. Because I mean, it's unfortunate that we don't know, we can't isolate all of the potential people and factors that have gone into what happened that night.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Yeah, that's kind of my thing. Like I wouldn't doubt if one of the family members were involved because of all of the strange happenings. Like, I mean, they were in the house at the time.
Mm-hmm.
Seemed like there was some sort of cover up or something. All the cleaning, the note is very suspicious.
Hmm.
And so
And it just seems like
Patsy called the
I don't think they
police
would have
at
a
5:50.
motive enough by themselves, but it
Mm,
seems like too much. It wouldn't just be a crime of passion, so I would have to think that she tried to involve maybe if Patsy did it, she tried to involve a friend, and the friend was like, "Oh shit, she's not dead, but she's like brain damaged. Let's strangle her in the most humane way possible." And then
Mm.
try to make it look as if there was an intruder. And then her husband was like, "Oh shit, what did you do? You whatever." Yeah. And then they just
I think David's onto something. My conclusion for this, because there can't be anything too decisive, so without trying to fill in too many blanks here, it seems as though whatever happened, the ransom note, I would say, was certainly written to allay suspicion, cover something, do something. And I know I've seen in other cases where people will discover something that they didn't do. Let's say that was the case, right? Patsy discovers it, and kind of ignores the body, writes the ransom note because she's so freaked out and concerned that they'll find this and accuse the parents because it looks so terrible, right?
right.
Let's say someone did slip in through the window, because that's one of the theories, and um, managed to find her or something and kill her and then leave.
Yeah, and
Well, how do the
especially
parents explain it, right? How would you explain it? Would you call the cops? Oh God, I found her dead down here. Like it'd be over.
and they didn't find any signs of a break-in. But then again, apparently they didn't check the basement if it had window welds.
well, and if they had a huge party, I mean, there were
Right.
dozens
There
and
were a
dozens
bunch
of
of
people. There
people.
didn't even need to be a break-in per se. It
Right.
could have been a guest
People
who
could have,
had isolated
yeah,
her.
yeah.
Um,
Someone could have just gone down,
and
Didn't
strangled
they
her.
say that they'd tucked her in or something, or they made reference to him having said that?
yes, they did. They said that what had happened is John had like found her, carried her upstairs, and either taken off her shoes or her coat. He doesn't remember.
This
And
is
then
post-mortem.
and then
Yeah.
right,
Well,
exactly.
not after she was dead.
And
Yeah.
then
Oh.
and
Oh, okay. This
then
is before she died. Okay.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure he didn't handle the body when she.
I
oh,
was
Jonathan,
like,
Jonathan, that
whoa.
wasn't a joke? No, of course not. Of course.
I thought it was for
wasn't.
some
That was just
reason.
you.
Hey, guys, not everything I say is a joke.
Well, it's definitely not all funny.
God
was
damn
that-
it.
Oh, shit.
God damn it.
Um,
Toxic.
So
Toxic.
anyway, no, she was still alive in this story that they tell. John brings her in, begins tucking her into bed, and then Patsy, quote, takes over from there, according to one of the guys, and then he went to bed, and then she went to bed, and
Yeah,
then
she took over from there, all right.
oh yeah,
She took over.
If it was a vacuous party, like they said, why are they tucking in the child right before they go to bed?
yeah, and it was
Going to bed at like 9 o'clock, 10.
one of the points I wanted to touch on too is the fact that she called the police at 5:52 a.m.
So
and
she would have had woken up early.
if she had a crazy party, it's also like a potential that like she didn't
She would
even
have-
like think to look
Yeah.
for her daughter until she was ready to pass out herself, and like maybe it was then that she, or maybe it was several hours before actually, because if we're going with the idea that she did and she wrote the letter, she would have to have sat down to
Yeah.
write the letter.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I think because that's the kind of speculation that is right. You have to speculate that, right? The note seems pretty certifiably hammed, not a real note that anyone actually left.
Yeah.
The mother definitely had issues and did not handle the situation, whatever it was, well. If she killed her, she didn't handle that well. If she didn't kill her and just found her, she didn't handle that well either, because what I consider to be what happened is she definitely did the note to cover something up. Patsy wrote it, did it to cover something up. She used some 80s film jargon that she'd heard, and that was total crap. I also could say that they fudged the crime scene for sure, the whole house. And any evidence that they may have been able to find around was significantly altered or destroyed by the people coming in or anything like that. So that's how I'd see it, is that they destroyed enough, and there were enough weird things where there was no verifiable way to say it was one way or another, that it was the family or someone in the party or someone who had successfully gotten into the house and done it and successfully left that no one knew had gone in there. And then there was the forensic evidence on the panties that could have just been left by the people who were packing the panties in the factory, or did any number of people. It was like trace evidence.
Yeah, the DNA you're talking about. There trace DNA of an unidentified male, I believe.
Right, yeah, which is totally inconclusive. It's another
Same
one of
with
those
sexual assault stuff. They don't know whether or not something did happen.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and they touched upon that really briefly.
And the one guy said there's no way that, and I know he was talking about, I mean, I'm pretty sure he was talking about a broken hymen, because they say that all the time about riding a horse or a bike or something, it could happen.
Yeah, and there really isn't even, modern knowledge about hymens, and that is that they don't bust necessarily.
And
They're all
also,
different.
and
They're
also,
all
it
different.
really seems odd that they don't have some baseline like measuring for, like tissue damage, which qualifies as sexual abuse or not. Because I mean,
Yeah.
there seems like I guess I don't know who that guy was. I remember he was some guy who was involved with the law or forensics in some way, but I don't know that he
Mhm.
was looking at actual evidence on this case, or that he was actually like consulting autopsy
Mhm.
um like sources. It really
Yeah.
seemed like he could have just been speculating and speaking out of his ass in the same way that
Mhm.
all of the other actors were when they were being
Mhm.
interviewed.
Maybe he didn't want to look into it that hard because it was an unpleasant thing, and why go into that crap when you don't need to, right? You know?
I guess, yeah, and it seems irresponsible.
Yeah.
That's kind of the crux of this documentary for me, because I do really think that it was artfully done, and I really did like that scene at the end where they had all of the Patsy's and Johns together on that set, and how it culminated in that big group act around the house, and where they're playing out like the possibilities of what could have happened. But
Yeah.
but
Yeah.
I also feel that this documentary in general is a little bit irresponsible, because I feel that doesn't it doesn't feel any obligation to try to figure out what happened. And I feel like it doesn't have any obligation to um, provide much context to the situation that hasn't been seen before. And
Mhm.
because of
Yeah.
that, I feel that if you're creating like a work like this, I think morally,
Have a responsibility there.
from my point of view, I think I would make that argument. Yeah.
Mhm.
So what do you think their purpose was by doing it the way they did?
Um, One potential meaning behind it would just be to say, here are the things that could have happened. Here are possibilities. Check them out, I guess.
Yeah,
So,
the word artful has been used a lot. I think that there was some good value in there with that, but at the end of the day, it did really feel to me like a little bit of a sensationalization that was coming from the popularity of crime documentaries on Netflix. I
Totally.
couldn't help.
And
I
you know,
couldn't help thinking about that all the time when watching this.
yeah, I agree with that. And to, I think, make my point better than before and more succinct, it seemed like the director just said, "Hey, look at this weird murder case. It was on the news decades ago. What do the locals think of it now?" And then just went forward with that. And because
Yeah.
of maybe some restriction to like the court taping or CBS or ABC or wherever it was filmed, maybe that's what caused her to lean so heavily on this kind of unique angle and strategy that she could use to make a, um, you know, at least minimally entertaining documentary to get greenlit by Netflix.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think there's an odd parallel between, so JonBenet was a uh, what do they call them? Pageant queen, and it's all about the show and everything. And in the documentary, all of the actors were going for maximum show, trying to ham up the role as much as they could just to get that money, that recognition.
Mm,
They
mm.
didn't really have any care. Just like Jean
Whoa.
Benet didn't care about, what it was like to be a cowboy or whatever,
Yeah,
200 years ago. They don't really actually care about the case. They just want to have something that makes them perform well.
that was a point that I am glad that you brought up because I do agree that on kind of like a meta level, if you look at like what the actors were doing and what like their experience of the situation was, it is really interesting to see them kind of have a like the way that we see them be interviewed in this casting couch has a sense of pageantry and competition to it as well. And so it's almost as if these bolder actors are in a similar way to how these beauty pageant stars are competing against each other and trying to stand out, that they do that as well. And in fact, I read an article by the New Yorker which actually talked about why they think that this documentary is kind of bad, and it's because they feel that they took these unknown actors who were hoping to land a new gig and used these very candid casting interviews that they probably didn't know were going to be used in the final product, and
Yeah.
because of that they told very very intimate stories about their life that they were
Well,
probably like moved to say partially because they wanted to be cast. And so there's a really interesting step back from this documentary, and you realize that they are also in a similar type of competition. And I thought that was a great way to like mirror what was going on with that family.
I should hope that the documentary makers I know it's fairly common, not by all journalists, but when people disclose certain things, especially in long interviews, you often go back and say, "Are you sure this is what you meant? Are you okay with this being published?" And I really hope that that's what they did, because especially in one case, a woman talks about sexual abuse, and she doesn't name explicitly the people, but she does heavily reference the situations. And I would really hope that it was totally her choice and that it wasn't just. I mean, I know that contractually, and she went into it knowing that whatever she said in front of a camera was not her property anymore, but still, you'd hope.
Mm-hmm.
You would hope, right? You would hope, and maybe they were made aware of it beforehand and not again afterwards. I wouldn't. I don't know Kitty Green. I don't want to attack her character, but I do think that some documentary makers are a little bit. I think they have fewer scruples than like the average journalist. As
Yeah.
like I don't see it as a news form that has the same kind of
Yeah,
ethical code.
it's really hard to sell a documentary and you spend years doing it, and then maybe you don't get the funding, maybe you do, but
Yeah.
it's not successful,
Mm-hmm.
you're not going to get funding in the future.
Mm-hmm.
All right. Well, what do you gentlemen think about this doc?
Rating.
Yeah, rating time.
Rating
Cue the bongo
time.
drums.
Yep.
Rating
Yeah.
time.
Hey. We better have good ratings after that.
Dave,
I
why don't
vote
you go
David
ahead
goes
first?
David
Yeah,
goes first.
let's do it.
Okay. I will give this 2.5 out of 5 ransom notes.
Whoa.
I think that there could have been more ransom notes written, obviously.
Obviously.
Wow.
But because it wasn't really so much a document, I don't know what I would call it. I suppose it was a documentary, but not on the case itself, but on people's perception of the case. And I think it kind of disregarded the facts in favor of aged perceptions based on contemporary news sources. And I think that was pretty unfortunate. I did enjoy the aspiring actors and actresses who appeared, and I think they did
Hey,
a pretty
whoa,
good
David,
job.
they're all actors now.
Yeah, sorry. I don't know whether or not I should.
They
But
still have aspirations, though.
They still have.
Just generally
don't they still
speaking.
do like supporting actress and stuff in the Oscars, or is that a thing of the past too? No, they do because they have different categories, so they have to name them different. So I'm just going with the So White Oscars. So yeah, that's what I thought. It was lacking in detail and finesse, but pretty heavy-handed on the personal accounts of things that people didn't personally know anything about. Okay, I revised it to 2 notes out of 5.
Woo!
Damn.
So I give even
not
less
often.
than the alleged kidnapper / murderer did.
Wow.
Johnny, what do you have to say about it?
I'm going to give it 7 six-figure beauty pageant bonuses out of 14, no, 13, no, 14 and a half six-figure beauty pageant bonuses due to its constant reminder in my mind of this being a cash grab. I couldn't get that out of my head, and it kind of interfered with my viewing of it because I just questioned what I was seeing the whole time instead of kind of being able to absorb, which usually documentaries have you absorbed into it, right? I kept being like, when is this real? Like, really? Huh, okay. There were some really cool moments. I thought it was kind of fun when they were not fun, but it was and of interest to me seeing the actors actually do their different versions. But the interviews, some of those I was like, whoa, okay, weird. And I think I've stated my case. 7 out of 14 and a half. Yeah.
All right.
I think that's it.
Thomas, what about you?
Well, my rating, I think I would give it, let's see, 3 weird sex cops out of 6.
Oh yeah.
He was definitely one of the most intriguing auditionees. That's a
Sexual
word.
educator, by the way.
Yeah, sexual educator.
And wasn't
yeah,
he not a
sex.
cop? Wasn't he like a security guard or something?
Yes,
Oh.
Actually, it
something
might
like
be a
that.
You know,
retired cop or
I
something.
consider myself a sexual educator.
But anyway, yeah, I thought the film was really interesting in how it was done with the auditions being used as the storytelling device. And I thought they blended those scenes together pretty well with the fully acted scenes with all those actors in it to kind of tell the story. And well, I do also realize it was kind of a cash grab for Netflix, and they didn't do a good job of revealing that information. So I had to subtract those other 3 sex cops because it left me wondering what actually happened. It made me look up everything pretty much online, and I also think that most of that information wasn't anything I couldn't have gotten from reading a few articles online, so that was also another downfall. But in general, I thought it was a good watch. It wasn't difficult to watch at all. It was pretty interesting in the way that it was done, so I enjoyed it.
All right. All right.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I thought that this documentary, it took a really interesting approach into exploring like the drama of JonBenet's murder. I don't feel that the point necessarily was to further the case or really try to provide a summary of the evidence and potentialities for what could have happened, or really like provide any new type of like vision, any sort of nice new angle on it. So I do think it was pretty uniquely done. I do think maybe it lacked a certain ethical focus or a certain journalistic duty, but it was in very unique documentary, I feel like, in its way of presenting information to the viewer. So it's a nice experimentation, although I do have questions on whether or not I think it's an ethical piece of work. And because of that, I give it 5 Florentine nipple whips out of 9 Florentine nipple whips.
My
Speaking of
God.
sex cops.
Wow. What the? Wow. Okay. Okay.
The Florentine nipple whips were the ones that were meant to be used with 2 hands, and it's kind of a light. It's a light
lighter
stimulating touch. It's meant to. It's meant to entice more than it is to punish.
See,
And I
I
learned
like
that. I learned that
like
from
that.
the educator.
Yeah, the sex educator / cop, maybe.
Right, and actually, because Florentine nipple whips seem so, and by the way, I'm calling them nipple whips not because I know that they're only, they're not just for your nipples, but
That's how you use it.
but he was especially concerned with breast bondage, so I thought that would be helpful. I thought he'd enjoy it, and because the nipple whip seemed so nice and good, I'm actually going to drop my rating down to 4 Florentine nipple whips out of 9. And
It's
that'll
more in
do it
line
for me.
with We did.
So
Let the record show that upon Googling nipple whip, just because I had to, there are products called nipple whip for mothers and their feeding babies.
do you
So,
whip the baby too?
Throw it out there. It's
Could a baby even hold a whip?
I okay, guys.
A
it's
baby
for-
is a big enough
but
target
it's
to get
for-
whipped.
It's for the nipples of feeding mothers and their babies so that they don't get, sore. It's like an ointment, okay?
Oh, yep, I'm seeing that right now.
Well, thank
Yeah.
you everyone for for stopping by to hear today's episode of Digital North. I have a movie coming out next Monday, so I'm not completely sure what it's going to be, but believe me, it'll be theatrical in some way.
By movie coming
High
out,
expectations.
might you mean we're just going to be talking about a movie that's coming out?
I will be the one choosing the movie. I'm not actually making my own movie. I guess I need to be clearer about that. But if you guys would like to hear more of Curious Magnet's work, head over to curiousmagnet.com. That's where we post all of our episodes. We also upload them on YouTube. And if you want some updates when we put out new work, check us out on Facebook or Twitter. And if you check out our Twitter, you'll see our daily feed of cool links and interesting articles that we find beneficial, and really cool YouTubers and YouTube channels that have helped me quite a bit and have helped other people waste time by learning about cool things. So I hope everyone enjoys it. Stay curious.